And Paul Reiser, a good friend of mine, said to me years later, he says, that's when I realized what a real comedian is.
He doesn't curse. He doesn't chase applause. Jerry Seinfeld just listens, then lands the line. And once it hits, it's airtight.
Do you ever think about every person you talk to is putting on an act, a total show?
It's a problem.
For decades, Seinfeld has dissected the rhythm of funny like a scientist. No gimmicks, no setups with training wheels, just silence, timing, and the truth. But beyond the craft, there's something deeper. His loyalty to the greats, the ones who shaped him, the ones he still studies, the ones whose names make him straighten up mid-sentence. He doesn't do noise, he does control. Eddie Murphy, Rodney Dangerfield, Richard Pryor, their names get tossed around all the time. But Jerry's list? It's different. It's not about popularity, it's about purity. And when Seinfeld names his 6, it's not a ranking, it's a reflection. A hall of fame carved in timing and taste.
Music is so mathematical, as is stand-up is extremely mathematical.
He's watched thousands, but only a few made him stop, rewind, and say that's it, the real stuff. The kind that's funny in 1965, 1995, and tomorrow. Here are the 6 comedians Seinfeld calls untouchable, clean, wild, rebellious, or quiet, and why no one else has ever made him laugh the same way since. Number 1. Richard Pryor. Some comedians tell jokes. Richard Pryor told the truth, and made it DMN funny. When Seinfeld named Pryor his North Star, it wasn't a throwaway line. Pryor changed comedy, but more than that, he changed comedians. He gave permission to go deeper, and Seinfeld listened. In interviews, Seinfeld has said watching Pryor wasn't like watching a stand-up. It was like watching someone confess. Pryor once said, "The truth is funny. It's the lies that get you in trouble." Seinfeld didn't mimic Pryor. He couldn't. No one could. But what he did do was absorb him. His rhythm, his silence, his fearlessness. He called Pryor the purest stand-up ever. On stage, Pryor would burn the room down and still make you feel safe. He didn't chase punchlines, he chased honesty. And that left a mark. Unlike other comics who chased trends, Seinfeld studied Pryor's command, the way he slowed things down, the way he leaned into discomfort. He called Pryor's sets orchestral because they had range, build-up, heartbreak. And it wasn't just the comedy, it was the integrity. Pryor walked away from massive paychecks if they didn't feel right. He lit himself on fire, literally and metaphorically, and still came back with a mic in his hand. When Seinfeld talks about voice, he means this: the ability to stand on a stage and not hide. Pryor did that, night after night, broken, honest, and hilarious. No props, no gimmicks, just a spotlight, a stool, and a man telling the ugliest truths in the most beautiful way. That's why Seinfeld puts him first. Because Pryor didn't just raise the bar, he was the bar, and no matter how polished or clever a new act might be, Seinfeld still measures it against one question: would Richard Pryor have laughed? Number 2. George Carlin. Jerry Seinfeld never wanted to be political, but he never stopped admiring the man who made it an art form. George Carlin didn't tell jokes, he detonated them. He turned language into a scalpel and dissected everything: the system, the media, the church, the culture. But even Seinfeld, famously apolitical, called him one of the greatest craftsman comedies ever had. Carlin once said, "I think it's the duty of the comedian to find out where the line is drawn and cross it deliberately." Seinfeld watched Carlin like a student watches a master, not for the shock value, but for the structure. Carlin wasn't chaotic, he was surgical. Every word was placed, every beat controlled. And that obsession with rhythm, that's where Seinfeld found common ground. He once said Carlin's delivery was like watching a jazz drummer who also happens to be holding a grenade. But it wasn't just technique, it was conviction. Carlin stood alone, never begged for laughs, never softened the edges. Even as his routines grew darker, sharper, more ruthless, he didn't bend. And that's what stuck with Seinfeld: the commitment, the fearlessness, the total disregard for safe material. He called Carlin a comedian's comedian, not because he was easy to follow, but because he was impossible to imitate. There's a famous clip of Carlin performing just months before he died. Frailer, quieter, but still lethal. Still carving through hypocrisy like butter. Seinfeld watched that set and said, "That's a man who still had more to say." Because Carlin didn't just write material, he wrote manifestos. And in a world full of comedians who want to go viral, Carlin reminded Seinfeld of something better: how to go timeless. Number 3. Don Rickles. There's funny, and then there's fearless. Don Rickles didn't warm up an audience. He set it on fire. And yet somehow, Seinfeld never missed a show when Rickles was on. Not because he agreed with everything Rickles said, but because no one controlled a room like him. Rickles once said, "I don't insult people, I describe them, and they are grateful for it." On paper, it was chaos. Rickles insulted everyone, by race, religion, gender, nothing was off limits. But in the room, it felt different. It felt like jazz, brutal, fast, honest jazz. Seinfeld said watching Rickles was like watching a guy walk a tightrope and pour gasoline while he's doing it. But here's the catch. Rickles never punched down. His insults weren't cruelty, they were connection. He found a way to level the room. Everyone was fair game. And somehow, everyone left loving him more. Jerry once recalled being roasted by Rickles backstage. "He called me a wire hanger with a voice," Seinfeld said, "and it was the greatest moment of my life." Because Rickles didn't just joke, he dominated, not through ego, but through presence. His timing, his unpredictability, it was lightning in a tuxedo. And for Seinfeld, who built his own style on observation and precision, Rickles represented the other side of the craft: chaos, confidence, command. Two completely different wavelengths. Same goal: make the room stop breathing. Rickles never wrote a sitcom, never needed one. Because what he had couldn't be bottled, it had to be witnessed. That's why Seinfeld put him on the list. Not because Rickles was safe, but because he made danger funny. Number 4. Bill Cosby. Before the fall, there was the voice. To understand why Seinfeld once named Bill Cosby among his greatest influences, you have to rewind. Back to before the headlines. Back to a microphone, a stool, and a storyteller who changed the rules. Cosby didn't do characters, he didn't do punchlines. He told stories, slow, sprawling, deceptively simple, and brought rooms to complete silence. Seinfeld once said, "He could hold an audience with nothing, just a word, a breath, a pause." Cosby's strength wasn't volume, it was rhythm. He built tension with pauses. He made laughter out of the ordinary. A dentist appointment, a childhood bath, a sandwich. For a young Seinfeld, who was learning the anatomy of comedy, Cosby was the blueprint. Not for style, but for structure. He showed that you didn't need to shout to be heard, you just needed control. And Cosby had total control. He wasn't political, he wasn't outrageous. But when he spoke, the room leaned in. He made comedy out of parenting, school, family dinners. He was, at the time, the master of relatability. Jerry once described Cosby's act as surgical. Not flashy, not loud, just perfectly built.
We might say, "Yeah, Brother Andy, we're going to do the so forth and so on." But we don't want the white people laughing at us.
But over time, the legacy fractured. The impact remained. The reputation didn't. Seinfeld never erased the influence. He didn't defend. He didn't explain. He just acknowledged the artist that once was, and the role that artist played in shaping an entire generation of comedians. That's what this list is. Not a defense, but a record of what shaped him before the world changed. Number 5. Gary Shandling. Some comics want laughs. Gary Shandling wanted the silence after the laugh. That pause, that breath, that beat where the audience realized something had just hit deeper than expected. He didn't need the crowd to roar. He needed them to recognize something raw, something true. Seinfeld once said, "Gary was the most spiritual comic I ever met. He didn't chase jokes, he searched for them." In a world of punchlines, Shandling brought introspection. His show, The Larry Sanders Show, wasn't just a comedy. It was therapy disguised as late-night satire. Vulnerability became a narrative device. Insecurity became art. Seinfeld saw it clearly. Gary wasn't performing comedy. He was revealing it.
A moment of inspiration.
Yeah, as you're doing the joke. And then it gets this reaction that's like double.
Unlike most comics, Gary didn't hide behind the persona. His onstage version was the real one, neurotic, searching, painfully self-aware. He didn't flatten himself for the audience. He gave them all the angles, and Seinfeld respected that. They weren't close in the beginning, but as time went on, the bond formed, built on mutual obsession with timing, tone, and emotional accuracy.
If you've got a t-shirt with bloodstains all over it, maybe laundry isn't your biggest problem right now.
When Gary died, Seinfeld called him one of the most original voices in comedy. Not because he said wild things, but because he said real things, and because Gary understood something most comics avoid. Silence isn't failure. It's space. Space for something meaningful to land. That's why he makes this list. Not because he changed audiences, but because he changed comedians. Number 6. Brian Regan. If Jerry Seinfeld is the surgeon, Brian Regan is the acrobat. He doesn't walk onto a stage, he bounds, eyes wide, limbs flailing, voice cracking. He's not just telling the joke, he's inside it. Seinfeld once said, "Brian Regan is one of the funniest stand-up comedians alive." Period. It wasn't the topics, but it was how he performed them, like a cartoon character that escaped into real life. Where most comics looked down at their audience, Brian looked beside them, like he was just as confused by the world, just as baffled by everyday stupidity. And that's what made him dangerous. Because underneath all the absurdity, Regan was sharp. His delivery was slapstick, but the writing, bulletproof. Every pause mattered, every expression had weight. Seinfeld respected that, immensely. In a world where comics often veer edgy or cynical to get attention, Brian stayed clean, and somehow still destroyed every room he walked into. It wasn't a limitation, it was a superpower. Seinfeld admired that restraint, that commitment, that trust in the craft. They eventually toured together, and backstage, Jerry was just another fan, watching a master at work.
This reminds me of when you have a problem with the little handle thing on the thing, and you have to jiggle it. It's always awkward when you have to tell your guests that.
Brian Regan doesn't shout to be heard. He doesn't curse to be cool. He just is funny, pure funny. And in an industry full of noise, that's rare. That's why Seinfeld put him on this list, because sometimes the loudest laugh comes from the simplest truth, delivered by the guy with wide eyes, bent knees, and a perfect sense of timing. Comedy's a strange thing. It changes, it evolves. But once in a while, someone shows up and freezes time, stops the room, forces you to see the absurdity in everything around you and inside you. That's what these 6 comedians did for Jerry Seinfeld. They weren't just funny, they were essential. They pushed the art form forward by being unmistakably themselves. No disguises, no formulas, just raw, brilliant timing, and a voice no one could imitate. And that's the real test, isn't it? If someone else can't do what you do, you've done it right. If you enjoyed this dive into Seinfeld's favorite comedians, make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which comedy legends shaped your sense of humor. You never forget who made you laugh the hardest. And neither did he.